There is a particular kind of loneliness that only exists inside a relationship. It happens when the person sitting beside you slowly begins feeling farther away than people who have never known you at all. Nothing dramatic happens in the beginning. There is no betrayal, no argument large enough to explain the feeling. The days continue. The routines remain. You still share the same conversations, the same places, the same ordinary moments. Yet somewhere beneath everything, something begins changing. You notice it one evening while speaking about something that mattered to you. Halfway through the story, you realize they are listening only enough to answer. The curiosity that once lived in their eyes has become politeness. The questions they used to ask no longer arrive. They no longer stay inside your words the way they once did. And you tell yourself it means nothing. People become busy. People become tired. People change. So you continue. You become a little more patient. A little more understanding. You begin carrying the emotional weight that used to belong to both of you because you believe love sometimes requires that. You start initiating the difficult conversations. You become the one who notices when the room feels quiet. You become the person who fills every silence because the silence itself has started feeling dangerous. At first, it feels like effort. Eventually, it becomes your responsibility. You start paying attention to things you never noticed before. The way they no longer look for you when entering a room. The way conversations end without returning to you. The way your absence no longer changes the atmosphere. You begin sensing emotional distance before you can explain it. And the frightening part is that nobody teaches you how to react when you feel yourself becoming less important to someone you still love. So you try harder. You become easier to understand. You become easier to keep. You stop bringing up certain feelings because they seem inconvenient. You avoid difficult subjects because you fear becoming emotionally exhausting. You convince yourself that being patient will somehow bring back what disappeared. But something strange happens when a person becomes certain that you will remain. The effort slowly changes. Not all at once. Not enough for either person to notice. You simply become part of the environment. Your kindness becomes expected. Your presence becomes familiar. Your loyalty becomes ordinary. And people rarely notice what they no longer fear losing. There comes a painful moment when you begin remembering who they used to be around you. You remember how they once listened. How they once noticed small things about you. The way they looked at you when your opinion still surprised them. The way your silence used to concern them. The way your happiness once mattered enough for them to ask about it without being reminded. Now the conversations continue, but they feel thinner. You sit together, yet something feels absent. You speak, but not as freely. You laugh, but it feels delayed. And sometimes you leave those moments feeling lonelier than when you arrived. That is when people slowly begin changing themselves. Not because they want to. Because they become afraid. You begin speaking more carefully. You stop saying certain things. You become more agreeable. You try to become the version of yourself that feels easiest to love. You hide disappointment because disappointment feels dangerous. You swallow needs because needs feel heavy. You act unaffected because honesty suddenly feels risky. And little by little, you begin disappearing from your own life. The frightening part is not realizing someone has changed. The frightening part is realizing how much you have changed trying to keep them from changing further. You begin accepting moments that once would have hurt you deeply. You become grateful for attention that used to arrive naturally. You stop asking whether your own needs are being met because preserving the relationship feels more important than understanding your own unhappiness. You tell yourself that every relationship becomes comfortable. But comfort is not always what happened. Sometimes people simply stop paying attention. There are evenings when you sit beside someone and feel completely invisible. They answer your questions. They continue the conversation. They remain physically present. Yet something inside you quietly understands that you no longer affect them the way you once did. And that realization changes people. You begin watching them more closely. You notice how alive they become in other situations. You hear warmth in their voice that no longer appears with you. You see them become interested, curious, engaged. The same person who seems distant beside you suddenly feels awake somewhere else. Nothing feels more painful than discovering that someone still possesses the version of themselves you miss. They simply stopped bringing it home. And because you still remember who they used to be, you continue chasing the memory. Not the person. The memory. You try to recreate old conversations. Old feelings. Old closeness. You revisit moments that once felt alive because you believe the relationship still exists somewhere beneath the distance. But emotional closeness rarely disappears in one day. It leaves quietly. Through repetition. Through certainty. Through the belief that someone will remain no matter how little attention they receive. Eventually, you become the one protecting the relationship from silence. You ask the questions. You repair the tension. You reopen conversations. You create emotional warmth. And without realizing it, you become responsible for keeping something alive that once survived naturally. That is usually when exhaustion begins. Because people can carry emotional weight for months before they realize how heavy it has become. One day, you stop talking halfway through a story because you know how the response will sound. One day, you decide not to share something important because it no longer feels necessary. One day, you realize you have become quieter, not because you have less to say, but because you no longer expect to be heard the same way. And that realization stays with you. You start remembering who you were before you became afraid of distance. Before you became careful. Before you became smaller. Because that is what chasing often does. It shrinks people. You begin arranging yourself around someone else. You become less demanding, less expressive, less honest. You tolerate confusion because clarity feels dangerous. You accept inconsistency because losing them feels worse. And eventually you no longer recognize the person who enters the room. You only recognize the person trying not to be left behind. Then something changes. Not because you planned it. Not because you learned a strategy. You simply become tired. You become tired of carrying every conversation. Tired of wondering whether your presence still matters. Tired of performing emotional labor that nobody notices. Tired of trying to recreate feelings that once existed naturally. And so you stop. You stop protecting every silence. You stop repairing every distance. You stop fighting every emotional shift. And for the first time, the space you once occupied becomes visible. Because people often notice absence in ways they never noticed presence. The warmth you provided. The attention. The effort. The emotional energy. All the things that quietly held the relationship together suddenly become noticeable only after they disappear. And sometimes they begin missing you. Not because you became someone new. Not because silence is powerful. But because your constant presence had allowed them to forget what life felt like without it. The tragedy is that many people spend years trying to prove their value to someone who only recognizes it after it is withdrawn. And by then, something else has changed. You. You begin seeing how much of your happiness depended on their reactions. How much of your confidence depended on their attention. How much of your identity slowly disappeared while trying to remain important. You remember all the moments you stayed quiet. All the moments you accepted less. All the times you convinced yourself that your needs could wait. And perhaps that becomes the deepest wound of all. Not losing them, but losing yourself while trying not to. Because the moment you stop chasing is not always the moment they start missing you. Sometimes it is simply the moment you finally see how long you have been running after someone who stopped turning around. And there is something deeply painful about understanding that the version of yourself they now miss is the same version you abandoned just to stay close. Long after the conversations become quiet, long after the distance becomes impossible to ignore, long after they begin noticing your absence, you are left with a question that follows you into empty rooms and silent evenings. How much of yourself did you give away simply to remain unforgettable? Because people often miss what they stopped noticing. But the truly frightening realization is discovering how long you stopped noticing yourself. If this felt uncomfortably familiar, subscribe for more psychological explorations of human behavior.